Good morning. Morning. Wow, you guys must be excited. I haven't even done anything yet. My name is Anita Gaffney, and I'm the festival's executive director. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We'd like to thank the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe for their stewardship of this land that they share with us through the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Treaty. Today's event is being live streamed, so I'd like to welcome our audience from around the globe, as well as our audience here at the Avon Theatre in Stratford, Ontario. Margaret Atwood is the author of more than 50 books of fiction, poetry, and critical essays. Her novels include The Handmaid's Tale and Alias Grace, both of which have been recently serialized for streaming, The Blind Assassin, which won the Booker Prize in 2000, the Mad Adam trilogy, The Heart Goes Last, and Hag-Seed, a novel revisiting of The Tempest. Other novels include the Giller and Booker Prize shortlisted Oryx and Crake, The Year of the Flood, The Robber Bride, Cat's Eye, and The Penelopiad, a retelling of the Odyssey. Her most recent graphic series is Angel Catbird. In 2017, she was awarded the German Peace Prize, the Franz Kafka International Literary Prize, and the Penn Center USA Lifetime Achievement Award. Miss Atwood has been a fan and supporter of the festival for many years, sometimes sharing her reactions to our productions on Twitter. She has millions of followers on Twitter. With the release of Hag-Seed coinciding with our production of The Tempest, we felt it fitting to bring together Canada's leading author with our artistic director, Antoni Cimolino, to discuss creativity and drama in our modern era, and who knows what else they might discuss. Antoni is, of course, the director of this season's production of The Tempest, and we're on the set of Napoli Milionaria this morning, and he's in his 31st season with the Stratford Festival, his 6th as artistic director. The establishment of the Forum is one of the pillars of his tenure and is emblematic of his view that arts are integral to society. In 2015, he was appointed as a member of the Order of Canada for his contributions to Canadian theatre and arts leadership. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Margaret Atwood and Antoni Cimolino.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Is this working? Yeah.
Seems to be, yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear us?
How about up there? Yes, okay.
Thanks for coming.
Always a pleasure.
I think that's true. You really like Shakespeare.
That's absolutely correct.
So,
And
what's...
he likes me.
What started this habit of yours of liking Shakespeare?
My Shakespeare habit. Well, I'm of the generation that had Shakespeare a lot in high school. So that would be the 50s, at a time when women weren't hired much in universities and colleges. So we had a lot of overeducated women teachers in high school. And they made a good job of us. But also it was the
I'm just beginning to realize what's missing in the modern world.
Yeah. You have
influence
to ban
of those
them
high
from
school
universities,
teachers.
and then they would all have to go back and teach in high school.
Yeah.
Anyway, there we were. And also it was the days of the set curriculum in Ontario, and also the days of grade 13, the hardest set of exams I ever wrote, partly because there was no air conditioning in the gym. And it was all within a 2-week period, and you didn't find out which exams were what until about a week ahead of time. So you looked at the schedule and you thought either hooray or I'm cooked. And then you were cooked in the gym. Anyway, on that curriculum every year there was a Shakespeare play. And we also had something called the Earl Grey Players. And the Earl Grey Players were a group of English actors who had somehow got marooned in Canada. And they went around and did, every year, they did the play that was on the grade 13 exam. Yeah. And as you imagine, they had a full house for every one of those plays. Right. And that there were only about 5 of them, so to fill out the extras, if you were a high school student at that high school, you could be in the play, though you had to bring your own bed sheet for Julius Caesar, and you had to bring your plaid car rug for Macbeth, and things like that. But it was very useful to see those plays enacted, because as you know with Shakespeare, a lot of the ones, when you read them on the page, you think this will never work. But then when you see it, you think, wow, this is amazingly theatrical.
We have that experience in the theater too, where you send, especially Ben Jonson, you send the actors the script and they go, this will never work. Then we have a first reading, and it all works.
And it works well because you can see the people, you can see who's saying what. And I noticed that you're doing Henry VIII next year. Now that is a challenge. How are you going to make that work?
Talk to Martha Henry, she's directing it.
Yeah, well, everybody will go and see it because it's never done.
Mm. And we're pairing it with...
There's a reason for that. But I'll be very
I was
curious.
about to help you sell books.
Yeah, that's a good...
I mean, we're pairing it with a new play by Kate Hennig, which has Catherine of Aragon as a central character.
Oh.
Yeah, mother's daughter, yeah.
Well, that'll be interesting.
So Catherine of Aragon will be in both, and so it becomes much more of a domestic story in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was very. It's a very well. Of course, everybody is riveted on the Tudors, and they always have been because it's so completely weird. As a family drama, you know.
You don't need my help selling books, but let me talk about this one.
All right. Okay.
This is fantastic.
Oh.
Yeah. So, Margaret was approached by Hogarth Press, who was undertaking a new venture, going to acclaimed writers and saying, would you retell in novel form a play of Shakespeare? And I think you were the first.
Yeah, I'm often the first because people asking me things know a sucker when they see it.
Yeah, it's good to be brave.
I don't know whether, I think it's just kind of stupid, but will you do impossible thing? Oh yeah, sure. So I was also the first for the Future Library of Norway. Some people know about that project, which is equally weird, or possibly more weird. So it's a Sleeping Beauty plot in which for 100 years, in each of 100 years, a different author will be asked to contribute a secret manuscript to the Future Library of Norway.
Wow.
During which time a forest will grow that has been planted in Norway. And in the 100th year, all of the boxes will be opened, the secret manuscripts will be revealed, and enough trees will be cut from the forest to print the Future Library of Norway. So my contribution was, I said, add archival paper to that, because if you're the first one, by the time you get to 100 years, your thing could have crumbled away.
But we don't think in those terms anymore. We think in like 15 to 20 seconds and 140 to 280
That's
characters.
That's why this is a great project, and it went around the world because it's so hopeful. Right. So it's hopeful. There will be people, there will be a library, people will still be reading, all of those things. So
now, speaking of hopeful plays,
yes,
The Tempest.
It's hopeful.
Why did you choose to do this project and to do The Tempest? And out of all of the canon, of all the plays, the histories, tragedies, comedies you could have chosen, why The Tempest?
Okay, it's the only one I wanted to do. Why did I agree to participate at all? Because the editor is the daughter of a friend of ours. And so, family story. Yeah. But also, it is a very interesting challenge. Mm-hmm. And the Tempest, I think you have to be old enough. I think you have to be old enough to do it. I think a lot of quite young people don't entirely get it. Just as a lot of quite old people can become irritated by Romeo and Juliet because they've forgotten what it was like to be 14. I'm going to kill myself. They've forgotten that. They think, sober up. And young people look at the Tempest and say, stop whining about being old. Anyway, so I think you have to be old enough, just as you have to be old enough to do King Lear. And it is the great valedictory artist's play. So anybody who is in the arts seeing that really gets it. So for those reasons, but also it caused me to go back and re-examine it at a very minute level to see how I was going to do this. How do you put The Tempest into a modern context? Because the mandate specified a modern novel set in our time. So what are the modern equivalents of those things going to be? And I started at the end, which had always baffled me anyway. So the last 3 words of the play are "set me free," at which point you have to ask, free from what? What is the imprisonment that the actor playing Prospero is asking to be freed from? What is Prospero asking to be freed from? And then you go back through the play and you discover all these imprisonments going all the way back to the first one. So everybody in the play is imprisoned in some way at some time, with the exception of Miranda, who is but doesn't know it, because she has never known anything else, but she is, in fact, on the same island prison that Prospero is. So that's why I set it in a prison. And the other big challenge was, what do you do about Miranda? Because what would be the modern equivalent of a father-daughter relationship in which the daughter doesn't know that there's any other men, has never seen another man, never watched TV, never been on the internet, never played any video games, has never seen any male people apart from her dad and Caliban. How do you do that? I mean, the father would have to be an extremely weird person. You also have to figure out where they have been exiled to. You can't use an island anymore. There's too many airplanes. They would have been discovered. All you'd have to do is set a fire. They would have been discovered long ago.
So one of the really fascinating things when you see the work of an author who's used source material is not so much what they've adhered to, but where they've departed from. And we're starting to hear, and Shakespeare did this a lot. Like, it's always interesting to go back to the source material when you're directing a Shakespeare play and see where he decided to make a different decision and why. And we're starting to hear some of the reasons why. Let me just say a couple of things about the book so that people can, for those of you who haven't read this, can catch up. So the...
it's got jokes in it.
It's got jokes. I'll try to be less solemn. Okay. So, I was once an actor. I can take direction. What were we talking about? No, sorry. The Tempest is a play about betrayal, a desire for revenge, and eventually transcendence, seeking for freedom from those desires and from this world. And so there's beautiful things here, like when you're saying, Prospero doesn't particularly want to go back and run Millen anymore. And Martha and I discover that as well, that the transcendence, set me free, is much bigger than just the island, right? But so in this version, this retelling, Ms. Atwood makes Prospero, an artistic director who is deposed. There's one particularly uncomfortable scene I keep reading and rereading. In which they're told they're being let go. And so, this person eventually wants to direct The Tempest. They're planning to direct The Tempest. That gets interrupted by their firing. They are able to continue this in a prison and working with prisoners, using the arts to help growth and personal expression, which is beautiful in this. And one of the areas, is getting back to departures, and it gets back to what you were just talking about, Miranda, is in your version, Miranda, Prospero's daughter, who is put on the boat at 3 years of age, and the intention is to kill Prospero in the play and kill Miranda. And that's the sin that all those courtiers are bringing with them. So when Alonso thinks he's lost his boy, his son, it's direct retribution in his mind for what he thinks he did to Miranda. In your version, Miranda does die of meningitis at 3 years, so she lives on as a ghost in Prospero's mind, which is so beautiful. She's sort of a combination of Ariel and Miranda. I know that you talked about the modern thing driving this, and I get practical considerations of art, but that's inspired. So would you wake up one day and you went, because it seems to seep right out of the text in a...
Yeah, well, Ariel is a sort of quasi-child of Prospero anyway, and is addressed in those terms.
Yeah.
And Prospero has to let this quasi-child go, just as he has to let Miranda go. So the Prospero family, as it were, consists of two good children, Miranda and Ariel, and one bad child, Caliban. So the dynamics of working that out, but Shakespeare frequently doubles motifs, characters. It's something that you notice when you're reading through. He echoes and doubles quite a lot. So there's really kind of two Mirandas, the memory of the living one, the continued presence of the spirit one who has grown at the same rate the real Miranda would have grown, and with whom Prospero has conversations in his head. And to him, she's really quite real. Not that he's crazy, but if you read the literature on dead people being present to living people, there's a lot of it.
She and releasing her becomes critical to the goals of the story, and that's something we found in rehearsal as Martha kept working on this. Margaret, we realized that mostly what she's doing is for Miranda's sake, to release her from this island, to release.
Yes, and she says that at the beginning. That everything I'm doing is for you. Which turns out to be true. So she fixes it up for her to become for her to regain her inheritance and more by marrying Ferdinand, and also to get off the island and back to a place where, quite frankly, there's a greater range of things to eat. I did a little piece about this for a food magazine, so what they're eating in The Tempest and what these various things were.
Yes, pig nuts and...
Well, they get fish, which is why Caliban smells like a fish. He's the guy who catches the fish. It's not that he inherently smells like a fish, although maybe he does, but he's also the fish catcher. So pig nuts, nobody quite knows what they were. There's several choices of what they were, and they weren't apparently nuts. They were something you dug up out of the ground, more like peanuts, but they weren't peanuts. Scamels is a big mystery. Nobody knows what those were.
Yes, Stephen Ouimet said, is it down by the Scamel drive-through?
Well, one theory is that they are a typo, and that it should have been sea mews.
Oh.
A bird. Okay.
Right. It's amazing the amount of literature on these things.
There is. Well, you have to know if you're going to write. You have to know what they're eating. It's always very important to me to know what people get to eat in novels.
And some of this literature borders on conspiracy theory, kind of. You know, there's one book that retraces the Aeneid voyage and claims that the island is Vulcano, just north of Sicily.
There's a lot of theories about what the island was, but I didn't spend much time on that. It's a magic island, and people then ask, where did it go? Did it sink back into the sea? Was it always a magic island? Was it a magic island before anybody got there, including Sycorax? And I noticed that in your version, you've put some elemental spirits, which I thought were very effective. So they are the real they're the real magic powers who were always there, and that's probably them making the sweet magic airs for Caliban, because it wouldn't be Prospero, would it?
No. As a matter of fact, when Martha says, when she calls the spirits to her and says, they do such beautiful, innocent things.
Making mushrooms.
And running along the beach and making the little grass areas to make the sheep not bite. And then Prospero, makes them do horrible things, open graves with their assistants, right?
Yes, well, they're demi-puppets. So whoever's got the magic staff has got command over them, which is, as he says, how she has been able to do those things.
And as we see in the world today, especially in Washington, it's tough being a demi-puppet. It's a thankless job. You have to write anonymous letters. Yes? I want to read a little section here, which is sort of about what we're talking about. It's early in the book, where Felix Phillips, and where did you get that name for an artistic director?
Well, now, dear. There was an artistic director here at Stratford called Robin Phillips, whom I knew. So a little tribute to him, to Richard Bradshaw, I put in the front of the book, who was the director of the Canadian Opera Company and got that opera house built. So, one should do these tributes.
These homages. He says he required a focus, a purpose. He gave this much thought while sitting on his deck chair. Eventually he concluded that there were two things left for him. Two projects that could still hold satisfaction. After a time, he began to see more clearly what they were. First, he needed to get his Tempest back. He had to stage it somehow, somewhere. His reasons were beyond theatrical. They had nothing to do with his reputation, his career, none of that. Quite simply, his Miranda must be released from her glass coffin. She must be given a life. But how to do it? Where to find the actors? Actors did not grow on trees, numerous though the trees were around his hovel. Second, he wanted revenge. He longed for it. He daydreamed about it. Tony and Sal must suffer. His present woeful situation was their doing, or a lot of it was. They treated him shabbily. But what form could such revenge possibly take? Those were the two things he wanted. He wanted them more each day, but he didn't know how to go about getting them.
So there you are, Prospero on the island.
Now, the world, the world is about magic.
Yes.
The world is about a magician late in their life.
Yes.
So why set it with the theater? Why set it with an artistic director?
Because The Tempest is a theatrical production put on by Prospero. He is the unseen director. He's invisible a lot of the time, but he is directing everybody on that island. And Ariel is his stage manager and special effects guy, plus lighting.
And special effects are really critical to it.
Special effects are absolutely critical. So I went to the Globe Theatre, as I'm sure you have done, and And everything that Shakespeare does in plays has, if something's in a play as a special effect, you know that they knew how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost as if we know how to make thunder. Let's have some thunder. So they already knew how to make thunder because King Lear's got thunder in it. So they had thunder, and they knew how to disappear a banquet.
Yes, and as a matter of fact,
All of
this
those things.
this text we only have in the folio, and it's the front of the folio. It's given pride of place in the folio, and the folio would have been printed about 8 years after Shakespeare died. And so in other texts, like Lear, for instance, we have a pretty authoritative quarto, something that would have been printed at the time on quarter pages. The folio would have been full page, it would have been beautifully printed. And because The Tempest is only in that one source, and you get the sense they put this down for a reading public, as opposed to the quartos, which are really describing what happened on stage. They have things like for the banquet going down, they say, with a quaint device.
Yes. What was the quaint device? Yeah, okay. So, first of all, a banquet was not what we think of as a banquet. It was more like an outdoor cocktail party with nibbles. So it wouldn't have been a great big table, as you often see it done. It would have been a sort of a little thing like this with some, little few things on it and some glasses, etc. It would have been smaller than what you think, and they doubtless had a trap door. So the aerial coming out with the harpy wings, wings not as big as the ones that you had, but actually on the aerial, would have been able to conceal the moment when the smaller table disappears into the trap door. That would have been the quaint device. So those are the sorts of things, and I had to consider what sort of a banquet am I going to provide
In the modern era.
in the modern era. Well, what I give them is what you always have backstage, which is the cheese and grapes plate.
Well, especially in a prison, you don't get all the cutlery.
No, you do not get the cutlery. No, not. Yes, well, anyway, there's a reason for those grapes in my version.
Yeah.
So the other thing I had to solve for was how are we going to render these 3 bad people out of their minds for a short period of time and then get them back into their minds. That involved a certain amount of drugs research.
Yeah, you're marked online now. They know all about your habits. Yeah.
Luckily not mine, and I don't think this drug as such entirely exists, but some combo of it probably would.
The ability to render those enemies, Tony and Sal, Antonio and Alonso, mad is almost, it is an end in and of itself. I think initially
it's part of their suffering.
Yeah,
Yes.
that she could just leave them that way.
She could have left them that way. She could have killed them.
Yeah.
They were entirely, as she says, they're entirely in my power. She could have finished them off. But that was not her ultimate plan, because if you're going to have Ferdinand marry Miranda, probably bad idea to kill his dad. Wouldn't you think?
People get over things. Hag-Seed. Out of all the titles you could call a novel about the Tempest, how did you come upon that title?
Well, as often with titles, there was a list of possible titles. And I was considering a couple of other ones at first, but they didn't really
Do you remember them?
Yeah, at one point, it was going to incorporate the word blizzard, because for the Tempest, I was going to substitute a blizzard.
Oh, because at the end in the last chapter, he comes out from the prison and he says the blizzard didn't materialize.
Yes.
That he thought, I see.
So
I wondered.
I threw the blizzard out the window. It became too problematic.
It's a bit DQ.
Yeah. What is... all right.
They got it.
What?
Talk to them.
Okay.
They'll help you.
I think you should answer, what is DQ? DQ, what's
Dairy
that?
Q, Queen. Dairy Queen.
Dairy Queen. Yeah. Oh, I get it. Okay, yes, it is. Yeah, well, it would have been that.
You see the cultural references of an artistic director of North America's largest Shakespeare festival.
Yes. Well, I was going to have them stranded in the prison with the blizzard, but then I thought, I don't even need that. That just gets too, it got too complicated.
Huh. Okay, any other titles you were thinking about?
Probably, but I can't remember what they were.
But Hag-Seed.
But Hag-Seed sort of jumps out. It's such an interesting word in and of itself. So in my book, because I'm so tired of the paucity of the modern swearing vocabulary, it's very limited. And it gets very boring, but people talk that way. So I had to have Prospero make a rule that the people that he's working with, the actors in the prison that he's working with, are not allowed to use any swear words except those that are in The Tempest. So they make a list. Those are the permitted swear words.
And I see in the afterword that you used a Shakespeare swear generator.
I did look at that, yes.
Yeah.
But I also went through the play and wrote down all the swear words, which is the list. And those are the permitted ones, and you get points off if you used the common vocabulary of our day, because that's not in the play. The Miranda, because, and this is again, what are you going to do for a female character in an all-male prison? And I've checked it out because I researched a lot of these in-prison programs, of which there are a number.
Yeah.
So I said, what do you do for these female characters that are not old enough to be played by a, what would you do for a Miranda-like person? And they said, well, we hire a professional. So I have him hire a professional, and she has got quite a dirty mouth, but she tries to play by the rules when in the prison. What was the original question?
Oh, forget it. But no, just as we're on this, and we'll get back to the title Hag-Seed, Anne-Marie Greenland.
Oh, yeah, Hag-Seed, yeah.
So
right.
in your afterword,
Yes.
you mentioned that she's in there because she won an auction?
Yeah, so there's this thing that goes on in England, which is medical help for victims of torture. And they do an auction every year, and one of the things that they auction is your name can be a character in a novel that somebody's writing. So her dad bid on it and won it for her. So that is why the actress's name, that is why the person who plays Miranda is called that.
Well, I got to tell you, I spent the novel going, Greenland. Blizzards, Greenland, and then afterwards I figure out it's actually a real person.
Yeah.
Real people are so disappointing, Margaret.
Not always. For instance,
Yeah.
In Year of the Flood, there's this person called Amanda Payne. Amanda, P-A-Y-N-E, same source. Amanda Payne won the auction for that book.
It's also a good name.
But it's a good name, yes.
Hag-Seed.
Yes, Hag-Seed, so as a word. So hag is a female word. There aren't any men called hag that I know of. You don't insult a man by saying you hag. Though maybe with gender fluidity, maybe you do know that.
I felt a bit hurt.
So, but seed is traditionally a male thing. So it's very biblical. Your seed shall be as numerous as the et cetera and so forth and whatnot. So these two things coming together, it's very curious.
And Prospero...
And we don't know in the play who Caliban's dad is. It's almost as if he's generated entirely by Sycorax. Mm-hmm. One of our prisoners has a theory about that, which is Prospero and Sycorax are in the same business, magic. And in fact, a number of the things that Prospero says he has done are pretty close to things that Sycorax could have done. Like, what for was he opening graves and letting dead people out? Well, excuse me. That sounds a bit sinister to me. So our prisoner says, well, maybe they got together at, a magician's convention. and maybe Prospero is Caliban's dad. So when he says, this thing of darkness I acknowledge mine, maybe that has a deeper meaning.
Well, and Prospero calls Caliban Hag-Seed at the end of their first scene together.
He does.
And
He calls him a lot of pretty swearing things.
And Martha Henry, as Prospero, kept occurring to her that she was a lot like Sycorax in having gone to the dark side. Now, eventually she comes to a positive place, unlike Sycorax, but that opening up the graves, she begins to behave like an evil.
She starts from the beginning. You know, revenge is a dark thing. Mm-hmm. It's not a thing that is approved of in Shakespeare's plays.
Just enjoyed.
Not always. Hamlet does revenge, and look at the result. Yeah. Big pile of dead people, including
That's theater.
Including himself. Well,
if you're an actor who's still alive at the end of Hamlet, you didn't have a very good part.
It's true.
But you know, one of Shakespeare's first plays is Titus Andronicus, a revenge tragedy.
Complete revenge, every which way.
So, but this play's different in the sense that
yes, I know, because he goes to the brink. He goes to the absolute brink. He could have killed those people. He could have left them crazy. He could have had a total revenge thing, but he doesn't. And the line by Ariel, "I would, sir, would I, were I human." That's the turning point. So it's one of these not really human people that turns the corner for Prospero.
And in those people on that island, in those spirits on that island, in Ariel reflecting, learning about humanity, watching the tears. What are those? Watching, you know, because Ariel talks about Ferdinand crying, about Gonzalo crying, and that's the reference. It becomes like a science fiction in the sense that there's these weird foreign entities, these creatures that we've never met before, and they are learning about humanity. Ariel is learning about humanity, and therefore serving as a mirror to...
Yeah, absolutely. It is on the verge of sci-fi, which is why when my actors in the prison are deciding who they want to play, at first nobody wants to play Ariel because he's airy-fairy, like he's a sort of and eats flowers and things like that. And this is not very macho.
No.
But when Prospero gets them to come around to the point of view that Ariel is an alien from outer space, and therefore it stands to reason that he would eat flowers and fly around through the air. And also that he's going to be the special effects guy and have access to a computer. Everybody wants to be on Team Ariel.
Yeah, it's a remarkable work, The Tempest, in the sense that it's about so many things, about finding forgiveness and release, about removing yourself from a life in the theater, and what does an artist do when they stop being an artist? You know, it's funny about being an artist, it's a bit like the mafia, you can't really retire.
That's true of writers.
It's this, and
writers don't retire, they just get work. Never mind.
Now, okay, so we're going to open up to questions from all of you in just about 5 minutes. So, and Ms. Atwood is really game for interesting, weird questions. She said, I love the more lunatic ones. So,
we could talk about where we get the word lunatic, but we won't yet.
The road not taken. So your creations are speaking to the world we live in today and this week. There was a hearing for a Supreme Court justice this week in which characters from a novel seem to look a lot like the characters in one of your novels show up in silent protest. What does it feel like to have given that to the world and to resonate that way?
Well, there are some works in which the characters from them escape into the world at large.
Falstaff.
Ebenezer Scrooge. You see a picture of Ebenezer Scrooge in an ad at Christmas, you know exactly what is being said. So Don Quixote. There are a number of them. With The Handmaid's Tale, it happened from a coincidence of a novel, a television series, and an election. So the day after the election, everybody in the television show woke up and said to themselves, we're in a different show. Not because the show had changed, but because the frame had changed. So they knew that people were going to view this differently, which they did. The Handmaids as protest had been used a little bit before, but after that election, they broke out of the confines of the book and the show and took on a different resonance. And this has happened in many places around the world. It's because they're so visual. They're very brightly colored, and because you can be there, and as long as you're silent, nobody can kick you out. You're not saying anything. You're not creating a disturbance. You're just there, and people can look at you, and they know what is being said. So I think it's quite brilliant. It was some women in Texas who kicked this off quite early. They sent away on the internet for what they thought were going to be the costumes, but when the costumes arrived, they were pink. And this is not right. What they wanted. So they immediately sat down and sewed up a bunch of red ones. And then they put the patterns online. So this has been actually reproducing itself all around the world in places like Ireland and Argentina, and where women's rights are on the line, either one way or the other. Either people are fighting for them or people are fighting to keep them from being removed. Not always successfully in either case, but that is the context. What does it feel like? Well, it feels strange, but a lot of the age that we are living in feels strange. Not just to me.
A related question, do you see yourself as a modern-day prophet, especially in your latter work?
No, because you'd have to be a complete fool to think that you can predict the future, especially now. So,
yes.
Yeah, especially now. You don't know what's coming tomorrow, let alone in a couple of years.
Some questions about The Handmaid's Tale. By the way, I was saying to Ms. Atwood that about 2 years ago, I went downstairs, was walking through the Festival Theatre, and we often rent out to film companies or make things, and there was a room filled with 100 white bonnets that were being made for The Handmaid's Tale. It was pretty eerie.
Yes, and a tribute to the designer called Anne Crabtree, who had to design very specifically for certain lighting conditions. So those bonnets are semi-translucent. Mm-hmm. But she also looked at 50 shades of red. To get the exact red, which you see.
That's very kinky.
Yeah, it's very kinky.
What is the subject of your next book, and when will it be published?
2019, and I'm not telling.
How involved are you in the story for the continuation of The Handmaid's Tale on Netflix?
Okay, I am. It's a Hulu. It's Hulu, not Netflix. Alias Grace was Netflix, and also an excellent production. I am involved as something called an executive consultant, and you know what that means.
Well, it could mean different things, but usually means nothing.
I would say pretty close to nothing.
Yeah, it's like being a major bank vice president. It's like.
Yeah. I am a consultant in that I know Bruce Miller pretty well, and I talk to him on the phone and sometimes in person, and I say things like, "If you kill Aunt Lydia, I will never speak to you again," as if he cares.
But Sarah Sanders would like you. No. Okay.
Who is Sarah Sanders? Oh, her. Oh, yeah. She would. Yes, she would. She would. So, yes, I read all the scripts. I make notes on them, but they don't have to do anything I say.
Okay, but look, you've spent a lifetime in the arts. You've written, I think, more books of poetry than novels. Is that right? You've done due service. I hope you got an enormous check for the television series.
Actually not.
Ugh.
Well, there was a movie in 1989, and the television rights went with that contract. So series television, well, my agent, a tough creature in Los Angeles, has managed to improve terms somewhat for seasons 2 and 3, but the first one, it was in 1989, series television was stuff like Dallas. Like, they didn't have streaming services. They had none of these kinds of things that they have now. And I thought the likelihood of this ever being a Dallas-like television series are zero, which was true at the time.
Right.
So then that contract went with the movie. The movie was sold to a distributor. The distributor went bankrupt. The assets were dispersed, and the contract went into the dark mountain with Gollum, and nobody knew where it was. Nobody knew who actually had those rights, because we couldn't trace that back. But finally somebody did some detective work, and I think MGM opened some drawer somewhere and found, lo, we have this, who knew? And then they did an initial pilot script, which did not get made. Maybe it was because of the female guerrilla fighters with submachine guns who were going to go into battle without their tops on, which I said, but I did write notes on that. I said, excuse me, nobody does this. And they said, well, it's television. Anyway, you wouldn't do that.
No.
No. So that didn't happen, and then it went to Hulu, and Hulu basically gambled big time and won. So the initial answer to your question is no, but things then got somewhat better.
Yay.
After that.
So that's what executive producer means.
I don't know actually what it means, but it's an interesting question, and I do read the scripts and make notes on them.
Well, this is an interesting series of developments that you're talking through here, like the change in, I think TIFF is screening something by Netflix as its opener this year.
It's an interesting development in the kinds of platforms that are available, and it has greatly increased possibilities for more serious literary novels, because the networks who have to, run a lot of ads and this and that and consider a mass audience probably never would have done such a thing. It would have been considered too niche by them and too weird and political and peculiar. But streaming platforms can do all kinds of things now and are doing them. There's a great range.
How much influence did the events of World War II have on your writing of The Handmaid's Tale? Thank you.
A lot. They had a lot, not just World War II, but the lead up to World War II, such as how do you get a dictatorship? What is the process? And how do dictatorships operate? What are they like to be inside? So not just World War II, but dictatorships after World War II. So from big to small. Ceausescu of Romania, for instance, was somebody who mandated that women had to have 4 children. And you had to have a pregnancy test every month, and if you weren't pregnant, you had to say why. Whoa! He came to a bad end. But he did that and filled up Romanian orphanages. And people jumped out windows because they could not afford 4 children, et cetera, and so forth. So there has been, and people have been talking about this, there's been a whole new generation of feminist dystopias quite recently. And a lot of them turn around reproductive issues. There's a new one I'm just reading called Before She Wakes, which is by a Pakistani sci-fi writer, female. I'm going to tweet it pretty soon. So that there's this whole new, younger writers doing these things, considering these issues, and drawing upon present-day politics. I drew upon politics going back to basically the Code of Hammurabi, and 4,000 years ago. Anything. But my rule was nothing went in that hadn't already happened somewhere.
One of the things that really struck me over the course of the last 6 years that we've been, since the creation of the Stratford Festival Forum, where we have 200 events each year, which talk about these plays in the world today, and having generals and doctors and politicians who've worked in other countries, from Stephen Lewis through to John Chastelain, is how much gender issues, how much the education of females, reproductive rights, rape as a tool of war come up, that so much of that is right at the center of the horror of the world and controlling people around the world, that it seems to be about controlling women.
Well, if you follow Davos at all, they had a thing just a few years ago that said the most important single factor in increasing the wealth of a country is the education of girls. So you'd think that anybody who had, any sense at all would do that. Mm-hmm. But they don't. Some of them do, some of them don't, but the ones that don't. And there's obviously something more important to them than the wealth of their country, and that is power and control. Anyway, it's a very interesting moment, and if you go to Iceland, you will see a country where things are probably more equal than anywhere else. And you also get a happiness quotient that is quite high.
It was, this whole discussion came up a lot this past spring with Martha and Prospero and Miranda and all those males that usurped her power.
I think this is in the original play, it's the play with the single fewest number of females in it, namely one, except for the Juno and Ceres and
who are powerful female figures.
They're powerful female figures, but they're imaginary in the play.
But it's interesting that that's what Prospero would show.
That's
his
what he
daughter
conjures
in the marriage,
up. Yeah, he conjures up. She's going to be blessed by 3 powerful female goddesses
who advocate virginity or control until she chooses to you know what I mean? So in a way, it is both about the power of a female not to have to take a pregnancy test until she decides.
Until she decides, yeah.
How do you feel about the continuation of The Handmaid's Tale beyond the scope of your original creation? Is that weird?
Do I have a choice? Well, as I've just explained to you, I don't actually have a choice. So I would say, lucky me that the team is so good.
Right.
And lucky me that they are dedicated to the premises of the original novel, including nothing goes in for which there is not a precedent. So anything new they put in, they have to research and show that it exists.
So this is a related question. How involved are you in seasons 2 and 3 of The Handmaid's Tale?
Yeah,
you said you
so
read
I've
the
kind
script?
of done. Yeah, I read the scripts. I usually see the advance, but Bruce is very picky. He doesn't want to show me anything until he feels it's really pretty finished.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to show me the thing on the screen. I see the scripts when they're being developed. But his story is very interesting because he, like Sarah Polley, had decided when she was 17 that she was going to make Alias Grace. She even wrote me a letter when she was 17 saying, "Please give me the rights." It was so cute. And eventually,
I think she was on this stage.
Yeah,
around
probably
that
so
time,
she was
playing Anne. Yeah,
no, doubtless Miranda or Cordelia or somebody.
No, it was Alice. Thank you.
Alice.
Don't go away.
No, go
I'm a 50-plus male. Please, don't leave. Sorry. So yes, she knew early on she wanted to do
did, and she said that it only took me 20 years. But she also said when she was doing it, if I don't get the money to do this right, I'm not doing it. So she really fought. She fought for, every inch of them, what she got, and I think she did brilliantly. And Sarah Gadden was stellar, as a person who could be lying or could not be lying. You can't tell. That's why she's brilliant. Anyway, Bruce, at the age of 19, decided that he wanted to do this. He wanted to do The Handmaid's Tale, and he followed it for years and years and years to see if it would come up. And when it finally emerged from the dark mountain, and they were looking for a showrunner, he pitched himself, and he got it. He then hired a writing room that is mostly female, under the illusion that they would all agree on everything. Isn't that cute? So they are in there hammering it out, 10 of them, and I think they're doing a pretty good job. Yeah.
Well.
But he introduces himself by saying, "Hi, I'm Bruce Miller. I'm the showrunner for The Handmaid's Tale, and I've got one penis too many." But but I hire a lot of women, which he does. Yeah.
We have lots of questions on The Handmaid's Tale, so maybe I'll move on. But this one, I think, do you watch and like the television version of The Handmaid's Tale, which you've sort of answered?
Of course I watch it.
Yeah?
Of course. But I don't usually watch it on television because we don't have television. But they give me screeners. Oh. They give me the...
Yeah. So you get to read a fairly final version of the script before it goes into production.
I get to send notes on it, as I say, they don't necessarily pay any attention to.
A question about, can you comment on The Handmaid's Tale film as opposed to the current series?
Okay, The Handmaid's Tale film was Danny Wilson. His wife told him he had to do this. What? You see, there's always somebody behind. And he pulled together, we had a number of offers at the time, but I was afraid that some of them sounded a lot like sort of exploitative, weirdo, kinky. They didn't quite get Gilead. They didn't quite understand what a puritanical dictatorship would be like. So it was more like maidens in leather and things like that. So we didn't want that. We want somebody who would actually pay attention to the premises. And Danny was that person. He hired Harold Pinter as the screenwriter. And he did the screenplay. And Natasha Richardson, whom I had first met when she was 11, because my first screenwriting job, I spent the 70s writing some television and screenplays, among other things. And my first screenplay was with Tony Richardson back in 1970, 71. We could talk about that sometime. It was very interesting. So she had the title role, and Faye Dunaway, I think, was very excellent in it. I think that a number of people were very good in it. They couldn't quite solve the ending. The ending, always a problem for people. My personal choice would not be to hide out from a regime with helicopters in a red trailer on top of a hill. But that's just... it's just my personal choice. I don't think it would work very well.
Okay, I'm going to move on from Handmaid's Tale, and I've gone to the other part of the forest here in terms of and here's the first question, which has me a bit terrified. Have you gone to see Martha Henry in The Tempest?
Yes.
And what do you think of it?
I thought okay, I'm going to explain to you the word crushed. Crushed is a good word these days. You can learn this on Twitter. So when you say somebody crushed something, you don't mean they destroyed it. You mean they aced it. That used to be what we said. So Martha crushed the great speeches. Those are hard speeches to deliver.
Okay.
And I thought she did a particularly good job of making sense of the epilogue.
Which is
it's a complicated piece of language.
And
Like
unlike Rosalind
when
at
you
the
read
end,
it, when you read it on the page, you think, what's he saying?
no, and has religious connotations and
It does,
spiritual.
yeah.
But unlike Rosalind, who's clearly speaking as an actress after a play to an
Yes.
audience, this is still Prospero speaking to.
It's still Prospero.
Odd.
So if it's still Prospero, what's he trapped in? And one of the answers is he's trapped in the play. The play itself is a prison.
Yeah. How differently did you approach the writing of Hag-Seed from the way you began your other novels?
Okay, so with the other novels, if you're making it all up, you don't have to do a lot of research. You research as you go along. With a project like this, like the Penelopiad, so with the Penelopiad, I began by rereading the Odyssey, of course, as one would. So I reread the play. I then reread the play. I then got the Oxford edition of The Tempest, which has a very good introduction, which tells you about all the productions, how it was done in the past, and the fact that it spent the 18th century as an opera with two extra characters, Dorinda, sister to Miranda, and this other guy who's has to be somebody for Dorinda to marry, and so they can have quartets. And and then when they tried to revive the original in the 18th century, nobody liked it because it wasn't an opera. Although The Tempest is the most musical play that Shakespeare ever did, it's closest to a musical. And music is an integral part of it. You know, people are led astray by it, they're soothed by it, they're restored to sanity by it. It plays a really central function. So then back comes The Tempest in the 19th century when Ariel was always played by a woman. And then we get a different Caliban. We get a Caliban who has noble savage aspects and possibly some echoes of American slavery, which wouldn't have been there in the original at all. So it's the most malleable of Shakespeare's plays. It's been done the most different ways, most different interpretations. So I did all of that. Then I went to all the Tempests that I could get to, and I saw all the movie and television recordings of it. I'd also seen the Christopher Plummer one here in the original, which was very good. So I immersed myself, and then I looked at the kinds of problems I was going to have to solve with the results that you see.
Well, I find that it's a real gift to be able to look at the work of an artist interpreting another piece of art. Anita, when you come back at the end, she's backstage watching. Hi, Anita. When you come back, could you make sure you cover the date of Auden's The Sea in the Mirror? W.H. Auden wrote a series of essays on The Tempest, all of them wonderful over his life. They were based on lectures he gave. But he also wrote a poem called The Sea in the Mirror, which is beautiful, and we're going to be performing here. And it's meant for the cast of a production of The Tempest to do after a performance. And it's funny what informs you over a lifetime. Because as he got older, his view of Prospero, Auden's view of Prospero, became darker and darker, informed in part by the fact that when he was a teenager in high school, he had played Caliban.
Wow.
Auden.
What a funny person to play Caliban.
And yet he carries the resentment of, in this last, The Sea in the Mirror, of a brilliant, troubled youth who is forever disappointing their father and feeling ostracized, feeling marginalized, feeling humiliated, feeling the father isn't taking the time or care because it would be embarrassing to have to get the kid out of jail. And it really informs his view of Prospero and the play as he got older, more and more. So it's just interesting to see how artists like Miss Atwood are able to look at another artist's piece of work and interpret it empathetically. You learn so much.
Well, Prospero, again, has changed. He changes depending on the production. And I think there was a while there where we were getting kind of a saintly Prospero, which isn't in the play. First of all, he's been a bad duke. It's his own jolly fault that he wasn't paying attention. He gets it afterwards. He realized what happened to his brother, but it's like saying, here's all of my money, take good care of it and don't steal any, because that's what he did.
Right.
So he was actually a bad duke, and therefore, because he was a bad duke, he was a neglectful parent to his child because he didn't take care of her interests then. And then he's filled with revenge, and like a lot of people who know they've screwed up, he blames it all on other people, although a bit on himself. But so it's very interesting, and I was very interested to see how you handled it at the end, because Antonio is one of those people like Iago, when he's told you've been really bad, blah blah blah, he doesn't say anything. He says nothing for the rest of the play. So you have a kind of a reconciliation. Well, and you even have a kind of a reconciliation between Caliban and Miranda.
Well, a question mark, but yeah.
Yeah, at least she gives him a little peck on the head. She gives him
that's Prospero and Caliban.
Not Miranda? I thought
Miranda
she has
touches his arm.
Touches his arm, yeah. But there's a little moment there.
Of let's start over.
Yeah, maybe. Because that's the other thing, people have never known what to do with Caliban at the end of the play. So some people have had him left on the island all by himself, which probably is not really a good ending for him either. Does he go with them to Milan? What happens there?
One thing's for certain, Prospero does ask him to go back into the cell, because from the beginning of the play, he's been forbidden from the cell.
Yes.
So to say you can go back, it's like, I always likened it to the child. It's your
time out is over.
Well, the kid comes home, he stole the car, he crashes it up, he nearly dies, he comes home, and rather than going through all that, you say to him, just go to your room, we'll talk.
Right. Is that what you say?
Well, I think in this case, it's what Prospero says. Remember, Caliban tries to kill her, and she says, you can go back into the cell. So there's something inherently forgiving about that, even though it's not explicit.
Yeah.
In my view.
Yeah, okay. and he does say, I'll be wiser after this. So he assumes he's going to continue being somehow connected with Prospero.
I'll search for grace.
Yeah.
Seek grace, but you don't really know with Caliban. You can't. He's an unreliable witness and speaker. You're not sure what's going to happen to him.
Uh-oh.
He'll probably crash the car up again and try to kill Prospero again.
Never mind.
Okay, so...
well, if I were Caliban, I'd stick with Prospero rather than any of those other people who want to put him on show, Yeah,
right. Dear Miss Atwood, many of your books are written from a religious perspective. Do you write from a personal experience or purely from research? Thank you.
So that would probably be The Year of the Flood, which has a God's Gardener green religious group in it. That would be probably that one. So I would say both in a way, because somebody of my age went through the public school system in Canada when it was still the Protestant School Board, which I think nominally it still is. But unlike in the United States, where separation of church and state,
right.
Canada had the Catholic School Board and the Protestant School Board, and we got a lot of religion in school. Plus, I defied my parents and went to Sunday school. They thought I would get brainwashed there. Didn't happen, but I know the Bible pretty well, because you don't go through English language and literature in 1957 to 61 without having to know it. Mm-hmm. We did everything from Anglo-Saxon to T.S. Eliot, and for 9/10 of that you have to know what the religious references are.
You'll enjoy Paradise Lost this afternoon.
Exactly, I will, because I remember it in the original. Curly hair was frowned on in it, as I recall. I resented that. And
I'm with you.
Thank you.
I'm with you.
Yes, enough of the wanton curls, say I. Yes, it's not our fault.
This is where we shake.
Check.
Do any of your characters haunt you? If so, which ones?
Do they haunt me? Usually the ones that haunt me are the ones that I'm writing right now. And there isn't room for me to be haunted by anybody else. But when I'm done, I'll sit in my rocking chair and doubtless be haunted by quite a few of them, especially if I reread the novels and think, why did I do that? Now, if I were doing it now, I would have done it this other, better way. I think that's one reason for not rereading too soon in your life. You'd just be consumed with second thoughts.
I teach grade 12 literature students, and they invariably start pondering their future after graduation. What advice would you give them other than invest in Bitcoin?
Okay, my advice is it will get better. But 31 is a difficult age. If you can get past 31, you're probably doing pretty well. If you get past 21, you're doing well. So the problem with being young in that age is you don't know the plot. So there's a lot of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. I remember reading...
Now there's a trade-off. By the time you do know the plot.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I remember reading novels, especially Russian novels, as a teenager, and thinking, oh yeah, I'm totally sure that these two people, after being apart for 40 years, are going to bump into each other when they're in their 60s.
Yeah, but they do.
They do, and that's what you realize later. You think it's amazing. It's like you bump into people from 40 all the time.
Not only that, they say, "You remember me."
Yeah. And so when you get older, you look back over that plot and you think, oh yeah, that led to that. That all makes sense. But when it's tabula rasa and you're 18,
yeah, and you think you're never going to live past 30 anyway. So, but you do.
What advice do you have for bridging the gap between progressives and social conservatives?
Oh, what a good question. Okay, the gap. The gap.
Mind the gap.
Mind the gap. Okay, so the word progressive is problematical in itself because it implies that progress is inevitable, which it is not.
Or that any given direction is a better direction.
Or that any given direction is a better direction. So as we read, for instance, in your theater program for an ideal husband, we read that it was radical feminists of the 19th century who pushed through the law against homosexuality in England, which got Oscar Wilde put in jail. So any given direction that people think is progressive, second thoughts later on indicate that maybe that wasn't such a good idea. The eugenics movement, very progressive at the time. Oh yeah, we got to sterilize all these people. Maybe not so. Maybe not so.
Or the strong men of that same period supported by people like Shaw,
Exactly. Yeah. And how close the United States came to having Charles Lindbergh as the head of a fascist state. So all of these things, and it was, as people writing about Churchill versus Hitler, Hitler was viewed as the modern figure. Churchill was viewed as the retrograde conservative, stuck in the mud blimp.
Yeah, in the 19th century.
In the 30s, before he became the wartime prime minister.
Okay, so don't avoid the question.
So
What advice do you have?
How to bridge the gap. Okay, I think what they should do to begin with is concentrate on the values they ought to have in common, that they ought to have in common. And I would refer them to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, from which come the Declaration of Women's Rights and also the Declaration of Indigenous Rights. They stem from that document. And we have forgotten about that, and we have forgotten why people put so much time into doing it. It was 1947. Okay, so why did they do that then? Because we had seen such violation of those kinds of principles under the fascists, and indeed under increasingly, although Stalin was Uncle Joe during the war, he wasn't before and he wasn't after. Don't know whether you've seen that film called The Death of Stalin, which I highly recommend. It's billed as a comedy.
I didn't think it was that funny, dear.
I thought it was realism, because that's what happens under those situations. People are living in fear all the time. So why can't they get together on those fundamental core principles of a democracy, which I assume they still wish to live in, both of them, and support those fundamental principles to begin with? Then they can argue about the details. But unless they're in favor of those, then they don't want to live in a democracy. End of story.
So that point you make about the clarity that sometimes comes after cataclysm, after the Second World War, which comes up, that for a few months, for about 24 months, it seems, Arthur Miller writing All My Sons, or the play that's happening here, Napoli Milionaria, written in 1944, presented early 1945, saying, for God's sakes, let's not do this again.
Let's not do it again.
How do we behave differently going forward? We hold on to that for about 2 years, and then we go back to, after the Great War, we go back to the Roaring Twenties. After the opening up the death camps, we go back to the craziness that we're in right now. And
well, after a while.
A year or two, it's remarkable. By the late 40s.
Oh, you mean we got the Cold War? Well, then it was kind of status quo in that regard until the wall came down. So the wall comes down in 1989, 90, right about then. And that means that the chess pieces on the chessboard are all in motion again, which is what we've been living since that time. But during the Cold War, America was the beacon of freedom and light, and that is why *Handmaid's Tale*, which comes out in 1985, wasn't taken very seriously in Europe at that time, because they could not believe that the United States of America would ever behave in these ways. Well, you can see why they wouldn't believe it, because compared to what was going on in the communist states, it was the beacon of light and freedom. But it seems to have forgotten about that.
Well, every country, our own,
included,
we have our moments that we're prouder of than others.
Yes, and our countries and provinces and.
Okay, so boy, did you ever come. Before you do this, just let me say thanks for coming.
What a pleasure.
We were just getting to the juicy stuff there. Thank you, Antoni and Miss Atwood. It was really a privilege to have both of you talk about The Tempest and insights into the genesis of Hag-Seed and the development. It was wonderful. It's a privilege to have you here in Stratford. It's amazing to hear you talk and all the connections. You're sort of the center of Canadian culture. No pressure. Thank you. Thank you. And we got schooled on Shakespearean insults with Hag-Seed and modern compliments, crushing it. Thank you. Antoni called to Ariel. Thankfully, I was not in the bathroom when you asked for the date of The Sea and the Mirror. The reading happens on September 27th at the Studio Theatre. Margaret Atwood is going to sign books. Like a true Stratford Festival fan, she's seeing 2 shows today. So she promptly has to leave at 12:30. So there's a short period of time to do that so she can get to the show. I want to promote next week's forum event, Simon & Schuster. Wayne and Schuster Tribute at the Studio Theatre. We're going to have some of our artists recreating some of their work and some clips and some great remembrances of these geniuses. So thank you so much for being here today. Thanks to our audience around the globe, and enjoy the afternoon, and thanks to Antoni and Ms. Atwood.